Hey, and welcome to our summer mini series. It's like Shakespeare in the Park, but it's not Shakespeare. I don't know. When I was a kid, my dad um, always used to drag us to Shakespeare in the Park. My father was very into theater. My grandmother was a drama teacher, and dad really got into it too. So I have fond memories of Shakespeare in the Park, even though well, yeah, Midsummer Night's Dream. There is like some Shakespeare that even a young kid thinks is kind of funny and quirky and cool. So, anyways, that was the inspiration. This is like, what do we call it? Like a mentorship mini series, summer series in the park here. And what are those? Well, they were usually free, right? You had this great theater troupe that would show up and just do a free thing in the park. And you'd be like, wow, that was great. And we didn't have to pay for anything, bring a picnic. So these are free in the spirit of summer series that are free. And we're going to just have fun and talk about stuff and learn things. So a couple of things or housekeeping details. One is that we also have sort of in relationship to what we're doing today, a masterclass, which you can pay for. This is not free. You can buy this later if you want. If you're really interested in the subject, you want to learn more, it's a masterclass on neurotransmitters and mitochondria that I put together. You can, if you want more information, you can email us at info@kalishinstitute.com. I also put a little blurb in the download section there if you want to download the link to the masterclass. It's 49 bucks. And then if you want to, we'll also be sending out a link to the masterclass in emails and follow-up emails. And that gets into a little more detail about the stuff that we're going to talk about today for free, okay? So let us take a look at me and then at the topic. So this is me, I'm Dan Kalish. If you guys that are new to this, signing up, who am I? I don't know. I have to have a PowerPoint so I can remember who I am these days. So I am lead faculty for the Institute of Functional Medicine's Practice Implementation Program. That's a big deal, you guys. I've toiled away in this industry for 25 years to get to that position. And I spent last 3 years working with IFM, and I designed a whole year-long curriculum for them, which Christy Hughes and I put together and presented at every AFM-CP, every module that IFM does, their evening sessions of practice implementation. But it's probably nobody knows this, but it's a year-long curriculum that we spread out throughout the whole IFM curriculum itself. And that was a huge project, involved, a couple dozen doctors, and was a big deal. And super proud of that accomplishment and being able to work with the IFM group. That's best faculty in the world, really, for our industry. So I'm really kind of privileged to be in that crowd. I also have done some research with the Mayo Clinic. Not a shabby place, some of the best medical research facilities in the world. And I was able to do a research study with them on the Kalish method, which was another great privilege in my life. Right now, probably the biggest privilege of my entire career is working with Dr. Richard Lord, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. So for those of you that don't know Richard, he's the original scientist that developed most of the testing that we use every day. The GI-FX, the NutriVal, the ion panel, the organic acids testing, amino acids testing, fatty acid testing. This all came off of the scientific bench of Dr. Lord. And he is in retirement now, but I have dragged him out of retirement for the last 3 years, and he and I work really closely together. I'll be presenting his work to you tonight, the way that he taught it to me a couple years ago. All right. I also am still in practice. If that does matter. I still actually do this stuff with real patients all the time, and that's kind of keeps me on my toes. And we're going to have a pretty extensive summer series, so this is kind of a launch of that, where we're going to talk about this stuff, mitochondria. So let's take a deep breath and think about it. I want to do a couple of things. I want to do a few slides, and we'll, some basic education, so you know what I'm talking about. Then I want to show you some examples of what we're talking about, so you can see some lab reality to this. This is a really common problem that it's really easy to miss. And then in addition to having a couple of case studies today, I also want to talk, as always, a little bit about practical application and how you can actually make all this stuff work in your practice, because we're getting tons of response all the time now to the whole telemedicine, telehealth issue, and how that can, be basically a life-changing thing for practitioners. I've been doing full-time telemedicine, telehealth for 16 years, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me personally and professionally. Patients love it. Everybody loves it, you know. So that's kind of the wave of the future now. Um, and as always, also you're welcome to send in questions. You can type them in. I might not be able to get to all of them, but I'll do the best I can. Okay. So let's start off with a couple of slides to introduce the topic so you know what we're talking about. Then I'll show you a couple of examples and how that all works. Okay. And by the way, from a business perspective, what we're talking about are patients that have fatigue, patients that have long-term depression, patients that can't lose weight, patients that have metabolic shutdown, right? A damaged metabolism. That's really what we're talking about. So this is, you know, got broad applications for a lot of people. And fatigue is the leading complaint in my clinic, probably is in yours too. So it's sort of a necessary skill set to understand how to interpret these labs. And it's not something that's taught anywhere that I've ever seen ever. Richard Lord taught it to me. He's sort of trusted me to teach this to the rest of you guys. Hence the free summer in the park thing here that we're doing. So we want to understand today the meaning of high and low mitochondrial markers on organic acids. Boom. Meaning of highs, meaning of lows. How do you deal with them? How are they different? I have a case study that's highs, a case study that's lows. We want to understand the role of oxidative stress, toxins, nutrient depletion, medication-induced depletion, and mitochondrial damage. That's kind of a lot. That's just basically saying that, you know, you should have a general understanding of the stuff that damages your mitochondria, right? A ton of oxidative stress damages mitochondria, toxins damage mitochondria, nutrient depletion, medications, the wrong kind of medications can damage your mitochondria. Not all medications, but some specifically do, especially antidepressant drugs. That's not good or bad. That doesn't mean that you don't want to recommend people take antidepressants. It just means just something you got to deal with if the person's on an antidepressant. And then I want to show you some basics on supplement program design, okay? So I'm going to skip through some of these slides because we want to kind of focus on case studies, but I want to show you just the highlights here so you can see who would you apply this to and why. Well, why are the mitochondria so important? They're why we breathe. Mitochondria consume 90% of the oxygen your body uses. Like that's, nothing is more important than breathing for human life, right? How long can you live without breathing? Not very long. This is a very essential process we're talking about. This isn't like a peripheral energy pathway thing. This is called central energy metabolism. If this system is down, it's like stabbing somebody in their heart. You know, it's just like a very bad situation and not going to be a good outcome. This is an essential system. So when we look at the pathways, and I'll blow this up for you here. And again, I'm going to skip through the slides. This is like a full lecture, but we're doing more of a practical workshop today. So I don't want to bore you to death with slides. But what we're looking at is how you take fat, carbohydrate, and protein and turn them into ATP. Without ATP production, you know, you'd be dead before you hit the floor, right? So this is a very essential component. And specifically, we're going to look at the citric acid cycle markers in particular, and what does it mean when these markers are high, and what does it mean when these markers are low? So when these markers are high, it means that there's a backup of these pathways. It's just like on the freeway, if there's an accident in, you know, a lane. This happened to me the other day. I was driving across the bridge and there's a motorcycle accident. Ah, that's a bummer. Motorcycle down. And then the whole bridge gets backed up, right? So if you have a pathway that's broken, if you have a link that's broken right here, right, you're missing a key nutrient, then you're going to have a backup of these chemical compounds. They go really high. So citrate or cisaconate or one of these mitochondrial markers will shoot up when there's a nutrient deficit that's not allowing this whole citric acid cycle to spin around. Okay, so high markers mean there's a nutrient deficit and you better do something about it. There can be two reasons for that, or three reasons probably. It could be diet related, they're not eating the nutrient. It could be absorption related, their gut is messed up. Or it could be, and often is, a genetic issue. So a high marker could be you don't eat enough of the right food. High marker could be you don't absorb enough of your nutrients. That's a gut problem. And a high marker could be, wait for it, and often is, a genetic issue. That's where this stuff gets really cool, when you can see the genetic expression of a damaged metabolism on these labs. Whew, that's like super cool. We had one of those cases this morning in class. So we are all toxic. We're kind of taking for granted that there's a lot of toxicity stuff going on, because I want to talk about the opposite. So the first part of this is markers that are high because the mitochondria are damaged, right? And things aren't working very well, and there's nutrient deficits and all this stuff is going on. Now, the opposite end of the spectrum is that the markers are very, very low. What does that mean? Well, if you look at the standard test interpretation that we all learned, when the markers are low, you're like, well, that's really good, because it's bad if they're high, so it's good if they're low. It's kind of like if your cholesterol is really high, your blood pressure is really high, well, that's bad. If your cholesterol is low, if your blood pressure is low, that's generally considered good, right? Obviously, there's a certain range in there. You get too low in anything, maybe it's not so good, and that's exactly what happens with mitochondrial markers. If they get too low, it's catastrophic. And too low or underactive system is what Dr. Lord calls mitochondrial retraction, or a hypometabolic state. This means that the mitochondria aren't damaged and not working. They're not even there. They're gone. So one thing would be like a car that's damaged. Like if you've ever had a 6-cylinder car, like I had an old Dodge Dart when I was a kid, and one of the cylinders isn't working, one of the things isn't firing, you can still get around, but it kind of doesn't drive real well. There's something wrong. So mitochondria, that markers that are high, means the energy production systems are down, the person is tired, they don't want to exercise, all this kind of stuff is happening, they're a little bit depressed, but they still have mitochondria. At least they're trying to work, they just can't work properly. You give them the right nutrients and the system fires up. What we're talking about tonight in particular is when there's not enough mitochondria, these markers are low, extraordinarily low. That means that instead of a car that's like firing improperly and barely getting you there, it's like someone stole your car. It's like you walk out and you look at the parking space and you're like, wait a minute, I left my car there, it's gone. The mitochondria are physically gone. There's not enough of them left in the body to register these markers, right? And that you could make sense of is really, really bad, because that's going to be depression, chronic fatigue, these more extreme states. And how does this all relate to your thyroid? Mitochondrial retraction, okay, defined as sustained reduction in the number of mitochondrial functional units per cell to compensate for chronically reduced levels of enzymes, blah, 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 blah. So it's not enough mitochondria. And if you want to hear just a total funny aside, so my son, Asa, is he's going to be a senior next year at Washington University in St. Louis. And he's a physicist, has been for a while now. He's trying to get this article published in the journal Nature, and he's got his big research gig at UCSF this summer. He's writing up his own research study by himself. Anyways, he's a really remarkable kid. I really love him a lot. But his first area of research at WashU was measuring mitochondrial densities. What are the odds on that? Like, he goes into physics and ends up measuring exactly what we're talking about. In other words, there's a whole group of scientists all over the world that are trying to see how many mitochondria are present in cells and what happens that destroys them. It's actually an area of research in physics or biophysics, is my son's specialty. So hypometabolic patterns. High levels of intermediates is bad. We talked about that. That's nutrient levels. Low levels means there's not even enough mitochondria, not even enough amino acids to make this whole thing work. Major depression, chronic fatigue. So if someone has high markers, they're in bad shape. If someone's markers are extraordinarily low, then it's continually going to get worse. And this has to do with something called mTOR in terms of the correction. Okay, so the mammalian target of rapamycin, sometimes also known as the mechanistic target of rapamycin. Long story, you should Google this later. Don't do it right now. 1960s on Easter Island, This really happened. These scientists discovered this stuff. It's kind of a cool story. But the bottom line is that mTOR stimulates growth, okay? And excessive amounts of this is bad because that's what we call cancer. So you don't want to do these kind of protocols in a patient that has cancer, has a strong history of cancer in the family, that kind of stuff. Because if we're talking about stimulating mTOR tonight in a few minutes when we look at the solutions, and got to be careful about who you do that with. If someone doesn't have enough mitochondria and they're cancer-free, then you want them to rebuild their tissues. So you want to use these programs that stimulate mTOR. And we're going to skip all these complicated slides because, oh my gosh, that's so complicated. I don't want to deal with any of that. I just want to get to the, I don't have a thyroid slide here, so I'll just talk about thyroid. So when we, how this relates to thyroid is very, very important. So, and I'll ask this as a question. And if there are any students in my class, they're going to get it right. But if you're not in the class already, then you're probably not going to get this right. So the question is, how, if you think about a hormone like insulin, you think blood sugar regulation. Estrogen, you think female hormone reproductive stuff. With thyroid, what do you think about? Just right off the top of your head, I say thyroid, you say what? Basal metabolic rate is the usual answer, or metabolism. Okay, now here's where it gets a little tricky is if the thyroid's regulating the metabolism, how is it doing that? Really think about it. Like, how does that actually work? Is your thyroid just going out and yelling at, your cells, burn fat, burn fat? No, it's regulating your metabolism through your mitochondria, right? And so what that means is pretty profound. What that means is that, let me show you here. What that means is that you can't, let me find the right slide, sorry. You can't direct these little guys to work properly unless the thyroid is working properly. So the mitochondria aren't going to do the right thing if the thyroid is not regulated properly. But the reverse is true too. If you have a patient who has a thyroid problem and you fix that thyroid problem and you got them on the right thyroids and the right thyroid meds or the right thyroid supplements or whatever you do for thyroid, and you see the thyroid labs are getting better, but they're not responding fully, that's often going to be because they're in a state of mitochondrial retraction. There's not enough mitochondria for the person to make the thyroid hormone work. So thyroid regulates mitochondria. If the mitochondria aren't present, you can't have the thyroid working fully in terms of its metabolic controls. That's pretty deep. So your thyroid patients who only partially responded to thyroid problems probably have a mitochondrial issue. At least you should do the lab and rule it in and rule it out. Your mitochondrial patients who don't respond fully to mitochondrial treatments may well have a thyroid problem going on at the same time, because thyroid regulates basal metabolic rate, which is done through the mechanism through the metabolism of the mitochondria, right? The mitochondrial functioning. So this is the kind of the heart and soul of what we're going to talk about. All right, so let's look at a little lab action for a momento. Let's see here. And conveniently, I have prepared this morning's class. So if you were yourself in the mentorship, you would have been in this class this morning and you would have seen all this morning in your class. So let's see. This is what they call product placement, right? Where you have a Pepsi can sitting on the table in a movie. Bingo, here we go. Okay. So hot off the presses, right from this morning, okay? Not even messing around. One of our doctors sent this in. I'm going to show you some examples of what we're talking about. So this is an organic acids profile from Genova Lab, the organics with an X at the end. And this is the first 21 markers are a referendum on the patient's mitochondria. So let's look and see how this particular patient, oh, and we can even see what the complaints were because we have the doctor submitted this. So here we go. Patients on a stage 3 adrenal protocol, they have insomnia, weight gain, and fatigue after the birth of a child, 2017. And major source of stress, not sleeping. Good luck sleeping when you have a kid. My son didn't sleep until he was 5 years old. I still remember that night. He did not sleep through the night until he was 5 years old. So would that cause some adrenal stress and mitochondrial problems? Yeah, probably. So we're looking at the lab and we're seeing all these mitochondrial markers, and we're just going to simply count how many are low. Okay, we're looking for patterns here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. DL means underneath detected limit. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So out of the first 21 markers, 12 are either low or undetected. If more than 6 are in that category, this is what we call a hypometabolic state. It means that this lab looks suspiciously okay because everything's so low. But low in this case is extremely low, and this person is hypometabolic. They don't have enough mitochondria to make a response. So right off the bat, hot off the presses, 9 a.m. this morning, class, we got a hypometabolic case. After a baby, not sleeping very well, system crashed, okay? In general, these people will not respond really well, or I should say they won't respond completely. They won't respond in the way you want them to a thyroid program. Okay? It'll have a partial effect, not a full effect. And there's all these other things on here that we're not going to talk about. Let's see, Lisa sent in a lab, another organics. Let's see if this is the right one. I think it is. Oh yeah, how convenient is this? Okay, so Lisa sent this in this morning. Let's just look at the patient history here. Now, when you're in the real mentorship, which I'm sure all of you are going to sign up for, right? You, what actually happens is you listen to these massive lectures I put together over the years. There's this huge amount of lectures you listen to. So you get all the intellectual background, and then you do the labs, and then you submit them to class, and then we talk about them in class. So, you know, I'm trying to mimic that now. This is the mini series, a mentorship mini series. I showed you a few slides. 10 to 15 minutes of lecture. Now we're going to do some cases. But in the real class, you get hours and hours and hours of lecture, so you really understand this. And then the classes are a little easier to follow, okay? Just want to give you how it actually works. So this is a 59-year-old female. She's been taking DHEA for 5 years, good for her. Did a macrobiotic diet. Top complaints, BMI, fatigue, spacey. You can't really tell from the complaints what's going on. Weight gain started in early childhood, then worsened with 2 complicated pregnancies. Kind of interesting. Both of these patients had problems after childbirth. It's a pretty stressful, hard thing to get through. So now, this is Lisa's comment. This is my first adrenal test I've done, since BioHealth closed, just asking some questions. So we're not talking about adrenals tonight, but with everybody, we want to test their adrenals and see what's going on. This person's what we call stage 2, so they need some adrenal support. But what we're looking at for tonight are the organic acids, in particular the mitochondrial markers. So now look at these markers here. Does it look like there's a preponderance of low markers in this section? Not really. Matter of fact, there's a cluster of high markers. It's the exact opposite of the last test that we just looked at. That cluster of high markers indicates specific nutrient deficits: magnesium, CoQ10, vitamin B1, vitamin B3, and so on, depending on what marker it is. And eventually you'll memorize that's B1 and B3, that's CoQ10, these guys are magnesium, and so on. So you figure out what specific nutrients this person needs to get their mitochondria to function well. So this is exactly like I was talking about with a car, where the engine's not firing very well. You put in some new spark plugs, things working beautifully. This person's mitochondria aren't working well. B1, B3, magnesium, CoQ10, they're going to have energy. It's just going to start to work because you're giving the nutrients that they're deficient in. They're going to be happy really quickly. If It was the opposite situation with the low markers. That's a whole nother conundrum because you have to sit down and figure out how you're going to fix that, right? You have to rebuild the system. So we'll show you a little bit about how that works. Let me pull up a program thing here first. Let's see. Here we go. I have to make sure I don't pull up a patient thing. I actually saw patients all day today, and I'm looking through my files here. I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. I'm telling you, these programs work really, really well. If you figure out how to do these, I don't know if you can figure all this out just from one webinar, but if you figure out how to do these, you'll be shocked. You'll be like, wow, that program worked really well. I just solved your lifelong depression. So here's, if the markers are high, we're gonna do two views. We saw the one with the markers that are high. You just gotta memorize what each marker means. CoQ10 is typical. Let's say it's 100 milligrams. I'm talking about the patient that I just showed you. You know, you give that, I don't know, as much as they can afford. CoQ10 is expensive. They needed magnesium, so some kind of magnesium chelate. You know, usually you want to get that at least in the 200 milligram range a couple times a day. If it gives them diarrhea, have them back off, obviously. A little more is probably better. And then, oh, they had the lactate marker, so they need B complex. Keep it simple. It's really actually B1 and B3, but just give them B complex so you don't have to figure out anything, you know, complicated. But a lot of it, not just a little bit, you know, a good hefty dose of B complex. CoQ10, magnesium, and B complex for that patient that had the high markers. Those nutrients, just like putting gasoline in a car, just zoom, it's going to start working again. Their energy is going to come back. It's going to take 3 to 6 months, but you know, you'll knock those markers down and you'll have normal mitochondrial action. So this is be the high markers. High markers. Okay. Magnesium, CoQ10, B complex. How did I know that? Because I memorized this. CoQ10, magnesium, in particular, the L-lactate being high means they need B1 and B3. Just kind of know that. You can see there's a little cheat sheet thing there, says B1 and B3. This section implies magnesium and CoQ10. Just got to memorize that. And how do I know about the B vitamins? Well, first of all, the lactate, and then right here, look, B vitamins. It's a mess. They need B vitamins. You can't make energy without B vitamins. In fact, when Dr. Lord was quizzing me, you know, because I work with him twice a week now, every Monday and Thursday, and he always asks me like really hard questions. So the other day, he was preparing this lecture for my students, and he gets on the phone with me, and he's like, "Okay, Dan, you got to imagine this guy in his late 70s with his really baritone voice and a Georgia accent. I don't want to try to imitate his accent because I can't do it, but you know, he's this really Southern gentleman to the nines, like maxed out Southern gentleman voice. And he's like, okay, Dan, what's the element? What's the structure? What's the biochemical factor that's the most essential to life? And then he realizes that I'm just totally confused. I don't know what he's talking about. And he's like, not just human life, Dan. I'm talking about mammals. And he thinks about it for a minute, and he's like, not just mammals. I'm talking about all life. I can't remember if he included plants, but I knew he included like other things besides mammals, right? So, and I'm just like really struggling because I have no idea where he's going with. And he's like, CoQ10, and he didn't say, and he says acetyl-CoA, okay, acetyl-CoA. And then that was the entry point to a 2-hour lecture on why acetyl-CoA is so important. But his point was that if you can't get acetyl-CoA into an animal, a plant, any living organism can't get enough acetyl-CoA, and ATP production's falling apart, and then you're basically gone. And there's a bit of a bottleneck here. You see how the whole world of fat, carbohydrate, protein, all just kind of comes through this one little bottleneck. Without the acetyl-CoA, citric acid cycle doesn't happen, and everything we're talking about tonight completely falls apart. And so his punchline on this, at the end of the 2 hours, and I'll zoom in on it, it was not a random conversation he was having with me. It was very strict, very specifically. You can't really see it blown up this well, but it was very specifically B1. B1 is like really, really important. If you don't have enough vitamin B1, this doesn't happen. No matter what else is going on, if B1 is deficient, this will not happen and life will cease immediately. Immediately, your life would be over. All life would be over on the entire planet if B1 just went away. Doesn't matter what's happening with every other nutrient. So anyways, that was one of the Richard lessons from a few weeks ago. This B vitamin, and the take-home point for me from that was B vitamins are really important. It's not just like a little thing you add in because you have to. They're a part of this in a very big way, right? Okay, so that's case number one. We can take a little break for a momento. Let me see, maybe I can answer a few questions. I can talk about something else, talk about the weather. Let's see. Oh, I can talk about, let me go back for those of you that joined us a little late. Let me go back to the theme from earlier. So if you think this stuff is interesting, you want to get more information, I have put together a master class. It's $49. It's on neurotransmitters and mitochondria. Talks in a lot more detail about what we're talking about tonight. Okay, and you can email us there for questions. You can also just go to the link, which is in your handout section. If you look in the webinar, you'll see there's a handout section. You can download that document, and the document that you can download has the link in it. We'll also be sending the link out to the masterclass when we send out the link of the recording. Okay, so here's the Mito masterclass. Here's the link here, and you can pick this thing up for $49 if you are so inclined. And yeah, there's a whole little detail on it, okay? So we'll get you guys that link. You can download it from the handout section. We'll email it to you in the next day or so with a copy of the recording for tonight's talk. All right, so now, and I'll handle questions at the end too if you guys have questions. Okay, so let's go to case number 2. Oh, and I'm supposed to mention this too. Everybody told me, I mean, I only have a few staff people, but they both told me this is the mentorship mini series. So I have to also mention this. Hang on a second. This is the whole point of me doing these things, and I get so excited I forget. I'm that guy who would always go to conferences and show up at the conference. I would forget my business cards, Oh, it's always like, oh man, I forgot, sorry. So if you go to Kalish Institute, go to classes, you can see our mentorship class. It's a year of this stuff in intensive training with literally thousands of hours of material, okay? We're just doing an hour of it tonight, but that's kind of like your next potential option in life if you want to pursue this, okay? 1 year mentorship. All right, so let's look at case number 2. So now case number 2 was the one that had the low mitochondrial markers, not high. High meant nutrient deficit. We talked about B1 is so important. Low, let's see, low, let me find the low guy here. Again, this was from this morning's class. Here we go. Low guy is here, or gal, sorry, low woman. So more than 6 of the original 21 markers are either low or undetected, i.e. hypometabolic. So what are you going to do there? Well, that's a very good question. Well, you could still use CoQ10, magnesium, and B vitamins, and that's not a bad idea. But they're not going to rebuild the mitochondria. They're going to resupply the mitochondria with nutrients. That's a big difference. It's a difference between, what would you be like building something? Well, it's a difference between like painting a house and cleaning it inside and doing the yard work and stuff and building a brand new house. Okay, so these are good and important, but in order to stimulate mTOR and get the building process going, the secret sauce is free-form amino acids. Free-form amino acids in a powder at a dose of 2 teaspoons, 1 or 2 times a day. Free-form amino acid powders, 2 teaspoons, 1 or 2 times a day. And you have to add additional tryptophan. No matter what formula you use, add in some extra tryptophan. 500, if you're in a generous mood, give them 1,000 milligrams of extra tryptophan. Why tryptophan? Because tryptophan is the rate-limiting step in the synthesis of all proteins, except for collagen, right? So anyways, in order to make proteins, in order to make mitochondria, you have to have tryptophan. It's nothing to do with its role in the brain at all. Tryptophan is an essential amino acid, and it's the one that exists in the smallest percentage amongst all the essentials. And if that guy is not present, this whole plan falls apart. You can also, if you get really kind of complicated, add in PQQ at 20 milligrams a day. And that is a well-known mitochondrial biogenesis product. Helps the mitochondria grow. And all the supplement companies carry PQQ. All right. So that's plan B for low markers. Now I'm writing up the marker test for program for low mitomarkers. More than 6 are low, not enough mitochondria present, you want to get on a growth program. You can include the other mitochondrial products, but you got to add these in. And then I'm assuming that this person's on a multi and whatever other nutrients they need. We're just talking about the mitochondrial portion of all this. Okay. And then let's see. So we saw about the high markers, saw about the low markers. You can kind of see the testing and how that relates. So let me just show a couple of slides and we can start to wrap up. See if I missed anything here. Talked about the master class, talked about the mentorship. This stuff is cutting edge. This stuff really works. This is like, I don't even like the word nutrition anymore. You know, this is just human physiology. This isn't nutrition. This isn't some special thing. This isn't whether you're eating avocados or not. You know, this is clinical medicine. This is physiology. This is like real stuff. You know, if you can't make acetyl-CoA, you don't have enough mitochondria. You're talking about, you know, the origins of human health problems. So let's see if I covered most of these things. We talk a little bit about mTOR. I don't know if I mentioned that enough, but let me just explain that a little more because it's a little confusing here. So with mTOR, when we give these free-form amino acids, so you notice the difference between the high marker and the low markers is we're using free-form amino acids and PQQ. PQQ, look that one up. It's mitochondrial biogenesis. You can read about how it works. It's pretty straightforward. This is a little radical because everything talking about mTOR is about slowing that action down because people don't want to get cancer, right? So everything you read about mTOR is about slowing mTOR down. We're talking about speeding mTOR up. That's a little crazy, but you have to do that if you want to get things to grow and repair. And so this diagram here shows you, let me see if I can make this bigger so you can see it easier. Oh, isn't that good? There you go, look at that. Why free-form amino acids, 2 teaspoons once or twice a day, has to be 2 teaspoons or it won't work. There's actually studies that'll show if you give 1 teaspoon, not enough, 2 teaspoons to stimulate mTOR, those amino acids are gonna force mTOR to kick into gear. You're gonna go through protein synthesis, you're gonna make proteins, and mitochondrial biogenesis. Okay, you're gonna start to grow mitochondria in the muscle. You're also going to, in your liver, uptake these amino acids and stimulate mTOR and go through protein synthesis, mitochondrial biogenesis in the liver, and the same thing happens in the pancreas. And there's like yards of research on this. If you guys ever want to read about it, I can send you information on that. If you're like real techie oriented, you want to read all the research on free-form amino acids, specifically stimulating mTOR to specifically get protein synthesis going. So you're making things, you're repairing things, and in this case, specifically targeting the mitochondria. Okay, and that's going to make your thyroid patients respond better. Your chronic fatigue people who have this problem are going to feel better. Is it a cure-all? No, because when we know that with this, there's a context to it. You know, you need to deal with oxidative stress, toxins. Remember we talked about where all this comes from in the first place? Where did I have that slide? Oh, well, I'll just tell you. So it comes from a depletion of nutrients. It comes from oxidative stress. So you have to dig in and correct the other problems as well. But this is a central component to making all this work. Okay, so free-form amino acids in a crystalline form, 2 teaspoons, and I'll show you the protocol one more time here. I don't know how I used to practice without knowing this, and yet I just learned this like 2 years ago. This is not being taught anywhere. This is Dr. Lord's research and his work really to bring us all to a better place. If you're one of those, I really like to learn more about this sciencey kind of people, which I totally appreciate, you know, then you can get Richard's new books or book. You have to have buy it through iTunes, basically. Here it is, Laboratory Guides to Health. Talks all about this in excruciating detail. It's a couple $100. It's a virtual online book thing. Get it from Apple Books through your iTunes purchasing, however you buy your Apple products. You need to have an iPad or an iPhone to get this thing. Kind of a pain in the butt, but hopefully you have an iPad lying around somewhere. You can buy the book. If you want to get into the science behind this and all the studies and all the research behind what I'm talking about, it's all hidden away in there, okay? But you know, talk about a practice builder. If you can solve your complex fatigue patients' problems with these kinds of programs, you'll be very, very successful in a more advanced way. Let me just end with one thought, and then I'll look at questions. And this is the diagram that we look at every morning in class. So we're talking today about energy, central energy, talking about mitochondria, all right? But we're acknowledging that there's an adrenal problem with a lot of our patients. There's a neurotransmitter problem could be potentially there. Could have a hormone issue. Most everybody we work with has GI problems, leaky gut or GI pathogens. Those are going to contribute to mitochondrial deficits. Toxins are the main problem, main reason why the mitochondria get messed up in the first place. You have to detox a person as well. Oxidative stress is going to cause mitochondrial problems. You have to deal with that. You have to replace certain nutrients, right? So I'm not saying that this is a one-stop fix, but you know, this is an essential component. And if you miss this, people aren't going to get better at the rate at which you want them to. All right. So you have a couple options for continuing on. You can get the masterclass if you're interested. And let me find that slide. There we go. Neurotransmitters and mitochondria. Again, the link to the masterclass is in your handout section, and we'll send out the link to the recording as well. And if you're like, I don't want no $49 masterclass. I really want to learn how to do this for real and help gazillions of people and make really good money doing it, then you can sign up for the mentorship. I've trained over 1,000 doctors over the last 15 years. That's not a lot of people. If you average it out, it's like 80 a year. So it's a small, elite, and very well-educated group of doctors that come out of this program. It's a year-long class, $995 a month, okay, for a lifetime. No, that's not true. The access for a lifetime. You don't pay me for a lifetime. It's like, I don't know, whatever $995 is, you know, for 15 months, I think. You get lifetime access to the class. You get live weekly calls. You get to review all the labs for real in person with me and the other students. We have thousands of hours of materials that go into this program. It's pretty in-depth, okay, for those of you that are interested. And then let me look at a few questions and we'll wrap up with a few questions. Let's see. can, let's see. I'm looking at all the questions here. Most of these were just people that couldn't get their sound working. Sorry. Um, oh, here's a good question. Is multiple branch chain amino acids in ion panel related to low mTOR? Ooh, that's a sophisticated question. I want to answer this one question because that's a really good question. Uh, yeah, and then for Cynthia, absolutely. Like, I mean, really, this is all happening because people are emotionally and spiritually adrift. They're not eating very well. They're in marriages that are bad. They're not happy sexually, emotionally, spiritually. They're physically not taking care of themselves. So, if you want to contextualize this, if you just get people into healthy sexual relationships, eating good food, and exercising, probably all these mitochondrial problems would disappear, right? So there's definitely a lifestyle component to this that we can talk about, in some future webinars. But that's the main point of functional medicine is to look at people's stressors and figure out all that. Um, and yes, Amber, B1 is the B vitamin depleted by alcohol. So to Amber's point, if you're drinking a lot of alcohol, low B1, you would have a problem that we just saw with acetyl-CoA, right? And all that. Yeah, let me see. I think the amino acids are coming up a couple times here. A lot of people are, so for Dawn, a lot of people are low in tryptophan. Absorption problems. It's certainly not a lack of dietary protein. And it's not a vegan issue. It's not a plant protein versus animal protein. It's just common deficiency. Um, and I always add the extra tryptophan. Yeah, you want to do that no matter what. Oh, so carnitine, let me answer this. Carnitine would be used in, hang on, let me pull this other thing up. Carnitine would be used when the fatty acid metabolism is disturbed. If these markers up here are disturbed, high, then you use carnitine. Otherwise, you usually don't have to unless those markers are high. Let's see. Oh, and then there's a couple other points. Oh, the free-form amino acids don't taste bad. If you buy them from a good quality company, they flavor them in a way that's doable. Just if you have complaints about the taste, just switch to a different brand. So then, in terms of sequencing, here you can see my opinions on sequencing built into this diagram. So if the person has a mitochondrial problem, I usually start to address that in the beginning, just so they feel better, and then we start to go after the gut issues as well, and then eventually toxins and detox. But detox is reliant upon mitochondrial energy, so you don't want to detox people too aggressively if their mitochondria aren't working. Um, yeah, so Scott's asking high versus low. So with the symptoms that show up with high mitochondrial markers, fatigue, weight gain, depression, will get worse and worse for most people as the markers drop out more and more. So the problems that you see with high markers will generally be exacerbated and longer term in the people with super low markers. So it'll be chronic fatigue in the low markers and just fatigue in the high markers. It'll be lifelong depression in the low markers and recently depressed in the high markers. Okay, that's a general rule of thumb. And to follow with what JE was asking is that I'm going to end on this thought. Here's our profound thought of the day. So we're doing a lot of different things in clinical nutrition. And one of the things that we're doing is doing replacement of stuff that's missing. So for example, you're low magnesium, give them magnesium. We just saw that patient was low magnesium, low CoQ10. I remember they were low in B1 and B3. I mean, how hard is that? Just give them a ton of that stuff. They're going to get better. You're just replacing stuff that's missing. That's the high marker patient, right? High marker, mito patient. Super simple, straightforward. Labs show you need it. Give it, they're better. Okay, low magnesium marker, give them magnesium. They're going to have to feel better. Someone that's been living without enough magnesium for 20 years always feels better when you give them magnesium. They have to. There's no other option. It's like if you gave someone 5 shots of tequila, they're going to have to get drunk. Nothing else can happen. Okay, not that there's such a thing as a tequila deficiency. That wasn't a very good example. But anyways, and I don't even like tequila. I don't know why I picked that example. But it's like if this happens, then this has to occur. Human physiology 101. That has to happen. So now another thing that we're doing separately from that, okay, is changing stuff. That could be cell signaling systems. Like the whole mTOR thing. That could be, and that has nothing to do with someone being deficient in amino acids. We're using amino acids to stimulate mTOR. Whether they're low in amino acids or not, it doesn't matter. Now, to J.E.'s point, someone with low branched chain amino acids could very likely have this problem because they wouldn't have enough muscle tissue because the branched chain aminos are low, so they don't have enough muscle tissue. And we have, a large percentage of our mitochondria are in muscle tissue, right? I think it's like 10,000 mitochondria per muscle cell or something like that. Anyways, it's a huge amount. And so we're using amino acids, in this case, free-form amino acids, to change something, to change mTOR, regardless of whether the person is deficient in aminos or not. Okay, so just to think about it, every time you're using a nutrient, am I replacing something or am I trying to change a system and affect change? In a way, it's like using a supplement like a drug. And so the branched chain amino acids are, BCAAs are mostly used for growing muscle and stuff. They're essential aminos, they're very important, but the free-form amino acids are what we're talking about for this specific case. And all the companies that you guys work with will have a free-form amino acid powder. You give that again, as I recommended a minute ago, dosage-wise. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I hope you guys get inspired and sign up for some more stuff. This is a summer series, so we're just getting it started with the first episode being today. So tell your friends and neighbors, send around the invites, let other people know that we have more stuff coming up. And if you're interested in more materials, you can look at the, where'd it go? Well, that's not working very well, is it? You can look at the, there, I have it at the end too. You can look at the masterclass, okay? And we'll send out, the link is in your handouts. We'll send out the link. If you're super enthusiastic, you can contact us at info@kalishinstitute.com and learn more about the mentorship program as well, okay? All right, we'll catch up with you guys next time. Have a good rest of your week. All right, bye for now.